Let's talk about the State of the Union. Obviously, President Biden, as Joe said, he's got high 30s now in some polls in his approval rating. He'd love to sort of turn the page on the second year of his administration, but obviously the war in Ukraine is going to color what he says tonight.
Yeah, and I've been reporting today that they've had to do a number of revisions to this speech. They're still rewriting it now as we speak because this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is now going to be a major piece of it. He had really hoped the president to focus on domestic issues today, to sort of turn the page and talk about pieces of that Build Back Better agenda. The bigger package, of course, is now defunct, but there are elements here that they could resuscitate. He is going to talk about that to a degree. He also needs to address an uneasy, unhappy American people. It's not just about his poll numbers that are poor as we head into a midterm year, and his party very concerned about the lack of momentum heading into this November. They feel like they could lose potentially both houses of Congress. But it's also American people that are just sort of frustrated. They look at they feel inflation, and they see the poll out today suggesting that half the country thinks the nation's in a recession or a depression. That's not the case, but people are unhappy. They're antsy about the economy. They're ready to turn the page on the pandemic, which is why there will be at least some sort of symbolism tonight. There won't be many masks in the room. The Capitol's changed their guidelines. The White House doing the same today. The president trying to push a return to normalcy, trying to say inflation will get better, trying to say my domestic policies can still work, but it's all being overshadowed right now with the standoff of Russia.
Yeah, Joe, it'll be interesting to see how President Biden addresses the war in the larger context of preserving democracy abroad and also references to what's happening in this country right now, and being careful not to declare mission accomplished on COVID, but to say, look, the masks are off in this room because of the work we've done for the last year and change. We've been able to move through this, and let's hope it's gone for good.
Well, exactly. Also very important, we've said this before, Mika, that he doesn't tick down a list of sanctions that they're putting out there, that he doesn't tick down a list of legislative accomplishments or at the beginning. He needs to start in broad themes. He can't go straight to the economy. The world's eyes right now are on Kiev. They're on Ukraine. And while most Americans don't want us to go there, most Americans wanted us to get out of Afghanistan. And the perceived failure in doing that cost him dearly in leadership points. So while Americans may not want to get directly engaged in Ukraine, they are looking for their president to tell them what's going on and what America's role is in the world there. One of the things that many people around Barack Obama would always say is, well, if we can't control it, it's not really the president's job to talk about it. That's about as misguided of a view of what a president's role is in having that bully pulpit. Joe Biden tonight, for the first time in a long time and for the last time in quite a while, is going to have the bully pulpit. And he needs to use that bully pulpit to channel Churchill, to channel JFK, to channel Ronald Reagan in talking about an autocracy, about talking about tyranny, about talking about freedom. And then he can launch into the rest of his speech.
He needs to explain that this is a big moment for the world. We are right now in a massive collective moment. And I worry he gets bogged down in Build Back Better and other legislative initiatives and goals and this and that. I think he needs to step up into the global sense of what is going on and explain it to the American people. And David Ignatius, have heard from some insiders that he is being advised, go big or go home.
So it's part of Joe Biden's story that people have underestimated him in every campaign. And he is going to have to find that gear that he has tonight, where he becomes somebody powerful. And as I've watched him over the years, there's something Joe Biden does better than almost any politician, which is to empathize with people who are suffering.
Yes.
People who have suffered loss the way he did when he lost his first wife and his children, when he lost his son. And when he goes into that gear and reaches out and expresses the human emotion that we feel as we watch the bombing of Kharkiv and Kiev, and we think about those sons and daughters, maybe he'll find a way to speak a language that the whole world gets. But that is the thing he does best. And as Joe said, going down lists and, naming key international principles that are being violated, that's not going to get him there. But there is something else that he has that's uniquely his that I hope he'll play on tonight.
And Ed, Western liberalism, Western democracy has been under attack over the past 5, 6, 7 years. You saw with Donald Trump attacking NATO, attacking Madisonian democracy, attacking the rule of law, attacking the free press. You saw that in Poland with the Law and Justice Party. You saw that in Hungary with Orban. Of course, their North Star was always Vladimir Putin, who was the most tyrannical. And that's all changed in the past week. My God, Poland. What extraordinary allies they are right now. You look at Hungary, even Orban came out, who would have believed it, came out criticizing Vladimir Putin. You have so many other people here actually speaking, Republicans talking like Republicans used to speak when I was a Republican, when Ronald Reagan was in the White House, when Margaret Thatcher was at 10 Downing. They're actually talking about liberal democracy. And what's at stake there? You look at the institutions of NATO over the past week, the European Union, as I said, and you jokingly responded, hey, the chocolate makers, pretty damn good allies after all. And you said, yeah, I hear they make a few cars too. I mean, the world has changed. It's a crisis in Ukraine. But the Western world that was under attack from Vladimir Putin, from Donald Trump, from Viktor Orban, from Trumpists on the extreme right in America, it's no longer under attack. The EU is stronger than ever. NATO is stronger than ever. Liberal Western democracies, institutions stronger than ever. And it all happened this week. That's something for the president to talk about instead of saying, the SWIFT banking sanction, if you look at the two banks, and no. Go full Reagan, go full JFK, go full Churchill.
Fully agree. I mean, this is the other great miscalculation Putin made. Not just the spirit of the Ukrainian people, but the response of the European Union and the United States. Something he clearly bet on would be the opposite, that this would further divide them, that he could exploit the weaknesses in our democracy to have a cakewalk in Ukraine, and he's achieved the opposite. I think this is, in terms of a galvanizing moment for liberal democracy, unprecedented, really, since maybe 1989. This is a 1989 moment for liberal democracy, precisely because it's a spiritual moment. This is a moral reaction we're seeing from people, that this just cannot be done anymore. And I think if Biden can harness that and put America really as the orchestrator of it, in alliance with our allies, the allies who, let's make no mistake, if Trump had been re-elected, I don't think there's any doubt that we would be halfway towards exiting NATO.
Oh, no doubt.
Right.
I don't think there's any doubt.
Now, to your point, and Ed, I'm just wondering, a question for you, Joe, if Biden tonight, and I'm thinking of Mitt Romney's comments earlier this week saying, I have morons on my team, if this moment in history and what is happening in Ukraine is a way Biden can explain to his Republican counterparts that this is why we have to come back to our democratic values, that if these people can stand up to Putin, perhaps you can stand up to a tweet from Donald Trump and come back to American values. This is the one thing that we can agree on when we see the carnage that is happening across the world.
I think... What is it? As bad lawyer, res ipsa loquitur. I think it speaks for itself. I mean,
does it?
I hope that's what that means in Latin.
You see some of them actually cozying up to Putin.
But see, Mika, this is a problem with Twitter. You have America more united than it's ever been, really. And you'll see somebody going to a convention somewhere, somebody else saying something stupid on a television show, somebody. But Caddy, those are the exceptions. These people have been more marginalized every day. Mitch McConnell yesterday, a blistering statement attacking members that went to him. And this is, again, these people are becoming more and more isolated because what was in vogue 6 months ago, a year ago, suddenly, well, it's just crashed up against reality. And these Putin-loving, illiberal Democrats looking very, very bad right now.
Yeah, if I was advising Biden tonight, I would say, first of all, keep it shorter, perhaps, than you might normally do in order to harness that Churchillian mood that he needs to have. You have the empathy that David has spoken about. You have the unity of the world that Ed has spoken about. But you also have to show, you know, this is for America. We are doing this, as Zelensky has said, to defend Western
Speaking of
values.
Zelensky.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.